Welcome back, everyone, to Bookish Dives. It's great to have you with us again as we explore some truly influential literature.
Glad to be back.
Today, we are getting into a really foundational text, Betty Friedan's 1963 work, The Feminine Mystique.
A landmark book, no question. Really shook things up.
Absolutely. And our goal today, really, is to understand how this one book managed to expose such a deep, pervasive unhappiness among American women back then, post-war America.
Yeah, something that was almost completely hidden from view.
Friedan called it the big American lie, didn't she? This idea that women were defined just by biology, by their role in the home.
Exactly. And we want to look at where that idea, that mystique, came from, what it cost women, and what Friedan saw as the way out.
It's amazing how much weight this book carried almost immediately.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just another book. People recognized its significance right away. I mean, you had figures like the anthropologist Ashley Montagu calling it, let me get this right, the wisest, sanest, soundest treatment of American woman's greatest problem. High praise.
And wasn't it Barbara Seaman who called it the most important book of the 20th century? That's a huge claim for a work of social critique.
It is. But Friedan had done her homework. This wasn't just opinion. She grounded it all in serious research.
Right. The interviews.
Yeah, she spoke with 80 women, different ages, different points in their lives, high school, young mothers, middle age. And then she dug into how this mystique was actually created and pushed.
Looking at magazine editors, advertisers.
Even behavioral scientists, the people who were consciously or not building the intellectual framework for it all.
Okay, so let's really unpack that central issue, the thing that made the book so necessary. Friedan famously called it.
The problem that has no name.
Right. What was that problem exactly?
It was this strange feeling. A restlessness, a sense of dissatisfaction, maybe a yearning that women, particularly suburban housewives, were feeling, but just couldn't put into words.
You have to picture the time, right? The post-war boom, the suburban dream.
Exactly. Making the beds perfectly, shopping, driving the kids around, being that smiling image from the magazines, the perfect wife and mother. That was the dream they were sold.
Many even had college degrees.
Just sitting there, unused. And despite achieving this dream, this ideal life, they were often deeply unhappy, miserable even.
But why was it so hard to talk about? If it was so common, why the silence?
Well, it came down to shame, really. Intense social shame. If you felt bored waxing the floor or, unfulfilled by your kids, the assumption was that something was fundamentally wrong with you.
Or your marriage, maybe.
Or your marriage, exactly. Everyone else seemed to find this mysterious fulfillment in domestic life, or so they thought. So you kept quiet.
The book suggests it was actually harder to talk about than sex.
For something like 15 years, yeah. That's what the sources indicate. A lot of women ended up going to psychiatrists, saying they felt, hopelessly neurotic because they couldn't reconcile their feelings with the expected happiness.
So if the official story was, everything's fine, women are happy, what were the women Friedan actually spoke to telling her? What was their reality?
Oh, it was often a story of extreme dependence, a feeling of emptiness. There's this powerful example she uses, a 23-year-old mother, beautiful new house in the suburbs, everything she was supposed to want.
And
yet she felt this deep dissatisfaction, not because life was physically hard, but because she felt she had, and these are her words, nothing to look forward to.
What?
She described just wandering through the house, unable to even focus on reading a book. Her entire sense of self seemed to depend on waiting for other people, her husband, her children, even her parents, to sort of take care of her life.
And if a woman did manage to voice some of this anxiety, what kind of advice was she likely to get back then? It seems like the real issue was often missed.
Completely missed, or deliberately ignored. The proposed fixes were often, kind of absurd looking back.
Like what?
Things like blaming incompetent appliance repairmen for making housework frustrating, or saying women were doing too much PTA work.
Seriously, blaming the PTA.
Seriously. Or, and this was a really insidious one, blaming education itself. The idea that college had made women unfit for their natural role as housewives.
So the solution was less education.
There were actual suggestions, serious ones, that women should maybe be discouraged from higher education because it just made them unhappy. And besides, men needed those university spots for the atomic age. It deflected from the real problem entirely.
Okay, if this wasn't just individual neurosis, if it was systemic, we need to look at how society actually built this narrow box for women. This is where we get into the feminine mystique as a construct,
Yeah.
right? Fueled by media, by supposed experts.
Exactly. And the media shift after World War II is stark, really stark. Friedan points out that if you looked at women's magazines earlier in the century, say the 30s,
The heroines were different.
very different. Often they were spirited career girls, nurses, journalists, advertising executives, women with ambition, with goals outside the home. They were seen as adventurous, capable.
And then came the 50s.
And by the late 50s, around 58, 59, Friedan's research showed it was almost impossible to find a heroine in those same magazines who had a career or any kind of serious commitment beyond her family,
So the ideal woman became.
the happy housewife. And often, she was portrayed as quite childlike, passive, defined almost solely by her husband, her children, her home. Her future was basically just the next baby.
And this wasn't just happening in magazines. Intellectual authorities were lending weight to this confinement too, weren't they? Psychoanalysis played a big role.
A huge and arguably misused role. A key concept here was Freud's idea of penis envy.
Which Freud developed based on his observations of women in Victorian society, a very different context. How did that get twisted in 1950s America?
Well, it got seized upon and, frankly, applied quite crudely in the 40s and 50s. It became a kind of catch-all explanation for any woman who seemed unfeminine.
So if a woman wanted a career or showed independence,
She was seen as neurotic, as rejecting her biological destiny. She supposedly envied men and was trying to be a man, which was considered unhealthy. The core Freudian idea, simplified down to anatomy as woman's destiny, became absolute dogma. Biology determined everything about a woman's psychology and her proper place.
and it wasn't just psychoanalysis propping this up. Sociology got involved too with something called functionalism. What was that about?
Right, functionalism. It's a sociological perspective that sees society as a system where every part has a specific, necessary function for the whole to work smoothly.
So applied to gender?
Applied to gender, it essentially enshrined traditional roles as essential and unchangeable. Functionalists argued that the female role was inherently about home and family. They even contrasted career success, which required self-enhancement, with homemaking, which supposedly required self-negation.
Implying that pursuing a career was somehow selfish or unnatural for a woman.
Precisely. These academic theories gave the status quo a veneer of scientific legitimacy.
The sources even mention the anthropologist Margaret Mead's work being interpreted in ways that romanticized female biology above all else. Like women should envy the serene femininity of a bare-breasted Samoan.
Yeah, Mead's work on other cultures was sometimes used or misused to suggest that focusing on intellect was somehow damaging to women's natural state, and that embracing their purely biological sexual function was the path to fulfillment.
And education systems seem to buy into this, too. Friedan was quite critical of colleges, wasn't she?
Very critical. She argued that higher education often failed women spectacularly during this period. College presidents, administrators, they seemed more concerned with protecting femininity than cultivating intellect.
How so?
Education was sometimes explicitly geared towards preparing women for marriage, for their future capacity for sexual orgasm, rather than encouraging them to really use their minds, pursue demanding fields.
And the students picked up on this.
Oh, definitely. Friedan noted that many intelligent young women learned quickly to hide their brains, to play down their academic abilities. They were afraid of being seen as peculiar or, worst of all, unfeminine. Being smart was a liability.
Okay, so we have this pervasive cultural message, this mystique. What's really striking, though, is the tangible cost. The book details the actual physical and psychological toll this identity crisis took on women.
It really does. And one of the most fascinating, almost counterintuitive findings she discussed relates to housework.
You mean with all the new gadgets, washing machines, vacuum?
Exactly. You'd assume women were spending less time on chores, right?
Yeah.
But the studies Friedan looked at show the opposite. Housewives in the 50s were often spending as many, if not more, hours on housework than their mothers or grandmothers did 30 years earlier.
Wait, how does that even work? More appliances, but more work.
It's a phenomenon she likened to Parkinson's law applied to the home. You know the saying, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Well, because the housewife often lacked a larger purpose or external demands on her time, the housework expanded to fill the void. Cleaning became more elaborate, standards became impossibly high. She was constantly busy, but often felt empty. It was activity without real meaning.
And this wasn't just about boredom, it led to actual health problems.
Serious ones. Doctors were reporting huge increases in symptoms among young suburban women. Chronic fatigue, constant nervousness, anxiety, debilitating depressions, even ulcers.
The book mentions some startling statistics, too.
It does. Things like an estimated 1 million alcoholic housewives in America at the time,
Yeah.
and a significant rise in what were then termed maternal psychoses, severe mental health crises related to motherhood and the pressures of the role. The lack of a core self was literally making women sick.
And this vulnerability, this emptiness, it didn't go unnoticed by everyone. Advertisers saw an opportunity, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Motivational researchers working for ad agencies were very aware of the empty, purposeless, uncreative feelings many housewives had, and they saw a way to channel that.
How? By selling them fulfillment.
In a way, yes. They explicitly manipulated that deep human need for creativity and achievement. Ads started promising women a deep sense of achievement from using a particular floor wax or baking the perfect cake mix biscuits.
So consumerism becomes the outlet for creativity.
Precisely. Buy this product and you'll feel fulfilled. And the researchers were quite candid about limiting women's aspirations. One is quoted as saying something like, if you tell a woman she could be an astronomer, she might go too far from the kitchen. They needed her focused on buying things for the home.
This whole situation also sounds like it could create unhealthy dynamics within the family itself, if the mother lacks her own identity.
Where does she find meaning? Friedan argued that she often turned to her children, but in a destructive way. Lacking a self, the mother might try to live through her children, needing them to fulfill her own unmet needs.
Leading to smothering.
Yes. Friedan used strong terms like smother, absorb, suggesting the mother's lack of identity could stifle the child's own developing personality. She called it a kind of progressive dehumanization affecting the whole family.
And the result for the children?
The danger was raising children who remained overly passive, childlike, dependent, because they hadn't been allowed to properly individuate from a mother who relied on them too heavily for her own sense of worth. It created a cycle.
So after painting this really bleak picture of the trap, what does Friedan offer as the way out? What does this all mean for the women reading this, recognizing themselves? It can't just be critique. There has to be a path forward.
Right. And for Friedan, the solution wasn't about small adjustments. It was about fundamentally reclaiming the forfeited self. It started with courage.
The courage to be an individual, as she put it.
Exactly. Facing that terrifying feeling many women had, that their lives somehow ended at 21 after marriage. She argued women needed to push past that, to see themselves as whole human beings with potential that extended beyond wife and mother, to move towards full human identity.
Which required more than just awareness. It required action.
Definitely. It required creating what she called a new life plan. This wasn't about abandoning family, but about integrating love, children, and home with serious, committed work towards a larger purpose, something self-chosen.
And that work could take different forms.
Absolutely. It could be pursuing a profession, going back to school, engaging in meaningful community action. The key was the commitment, the seriousness of purpose, the self-determination involved. It was about having a core identity outside the domestic sphere.
And interestingly, there was data emerging around that time that seemed to support this idea, right? From the Kinsey reports.
Yes, the Kinsey findings on female sexuality actually contradicted the core tenets of the Mystique in a pretty significant way.
How so? The Mystique suggested fulfillment came from embracing the domestic role, maybe marrying young.
Right. But Kinsey's data pointed in the opposite direction. It showed a correlation between a woman's level of education and her reported sexual fulfillment, including the ability to achieve orgasm.
So more education meant?
Generally, yes. Women with higher education, especially graduate-level education, reported greater sexual satisfaction compared to those who married very young or had only minimal schooling.
That really undermines the anatomy is destiny argument.
Completely. It suggested that fulfillment, even sexual fulfillment, was linked not just to biology, but to things like self-esteem, independence, intellectual engagement, the very things the Mystique discouraged.
That shift is huge. It reframes everything. There's that great anecdote in the book about the woman who reclaimed a room for herself.
Oh, the art studio, yes. She stopped trying to be the mythical perfect mother and turned a bedroom into her painting studio.
And the realization she had.
It was profound. She said something like, I looked at the picture and it was like finding myself. I don't need to make such a production of my marriage now because it's real. Finding her own identity actually strengthened her relationships, freed her and her family.
It seems the book's power was in forcing women to confront that feeling, that slow death of mind and spirit they might be experiencing, and showing it wasn't a personal failing, but a societal problem.
Exactly. Naming the problem was the first step towards solving it.
And that brings us to maybe the most controversial part of the book, the analogy she drew, comparing the suburban home to something much darker.
Ah, yes. The concentration camp analogy.
Yeah.
It certainly provoked a strong reaction.
It's a really jarring comparison. How did she use it in the context of women finding freedom? What was the point she was making?
Well, she was very clear, crucially, that the suburban home is not a literal concentration camp. The comparison wasn't about physical brutality.
So what was it about?
It was about the psychological effects she observed. The passivity, the loss of identity, the strange sense of suspended time, the regression which she felt echoed, in some ways, the psychological states described by survivors of actual concentration camps who had lost their sense of self.
Okay, so it was about that internal experience of dehumanization.
Yes. And the point she drew from it was about reclaiming agency. Just like Viktor Frankl finding meaning, or in another example she uses, a dancer in a camp, choosing to practice her art for herself, women trapped in the Mystique needed to make a conscious choice. They had to stop merely adjusting to the comfortable concentration camp of the Mystique and actively exercise their human freedom and recapture their sense of self by choosing and pursuing their own purpose. The first step was that internal decision to act.
A powerful call to action and a message about self-determination that frankly still resonates very strongly today. Thank you so much for walking us through the core ideas and the impact of the feminine mystique.
It was a pleasure. It's a book that definitely rewards revisiting.
Absolutely. And if you, listening, want to continue exploring these kinds of culture-shaping books and ideas with us, make sure to follow Bookish Guides wherever you get your podcasts or audio content. We'll be back soon with another exploration.